Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and we're going to go in an interesting direction today. My guest today focuses on a niche that I didn't even know was a niche until we met just a short moment ago in our green room. And it's child-free people. And he shared an interesting fact with me, which is that 20% of the population is child-free. I clearly have children and talk about family and kids all the time on this podcast. So perhaps I might have pushed away our child-free listeners in the process. But if I didn't, I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. But regardless, I think there's going to be value in this conversation for all of our listeners. And I encourage you to stay and listen. Whether it's you're looking for your specific niche that you want to deal with, and maybe child-free is something that you want to dive into, or this is going to be about he's a wealth planner, so it's going to be about wealth creation and making good financial decisions. So maybe you want to stick around for that, or maybe you want to stick around for a combination of the two. Either way, we're going to have a great conversation, and we invite you to join us and listen. So let me tell you a bit about our guest. His name is Jay Zigmont, and Jay is a PhD, MBA, CFP, certified financial planner, and the founder of Child-Free Wealth, a life and financial planning firm dedicated to helping child-free and permanently childless people. Child-Free Wealth is the first life and financial planning firm dedicated to serving child-free people. Dr. Jay is a certified financial planner, child-free wealth specialist, and author of the book Portraits of Child-Free Wealth. Dr. Jay is the co-host of the Child-Free Wealth podcast. His PhD is in adult learning from the University of Connecticut. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. And if I can, surprise you and go, hey, this group exists that you didn't even know about, it's a good start to the morning.
Yes, absolutely. And those that are listening who also haven't heard of it, it's a good start to your morning too. Hopefully you're listening to us early Thursday morning, which means you're subscribed to the podcast and every time we release a new episode. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you might want to do that right now. Hit that subscribe button. You get notified every time we release a new episode. We're here every single Thursday with an amazing conversation with another amazing expert, just like Jay. All right, Jay. I make this first question really easy because you, I don't. Our listeners may have never heard of you. Some of them may have, I don't know, because paths cross in interesting ways and people intersect lives in different ways as well. But for those who don't know who you are, don't know your story, give me a little bit of the backstory. How did you get into financial planning, wealth planning, specifically the child-free niche? I know you're very passionate about it. So what's behind all that?
Yeah, I'm one of those weird people that's the career changers to finance. I come out of healthcare and academia, and one of the things you learn once you've been in healthcare for long enough that it's all about finance anyway. So if you're going to be all about finance, you might as well make the financial money. I come out of the coaching land, and my wife and I, we're child free. And when I was studying to become a certified financial planner, what's surprising is there's never once a mention of being child free. And just to define child free, I mean people who don't have kids and not planning on having kids ever, like not like you're child free for the weekend, like never. And it doesn't exist in the literature. And, I have a PhD and I'm a researcher by nature. So I started researching this really around this question of like, how weird are me and my wife? And that sounds a little weird, but hey, we're both PhDs, we're weird by nature. But turns out about 20% of the US are child free by choice. The other 5% are childless, not by choice. So there's 25% of the US that don't have kids, aren't planning on having kids, yet they're completely ignored by the financial literature, which to me is one of those things like, when you find like it's completely ignored, either it's ignored for a reason or, hey, there's a great business opportunity.
Yeah. So which one was it?
It has to begin in a few years. No, the fun thing is, law, finance, whatever it is, they talk about picking a niche and how important that is. And one of the things I found is that child-free people, being child-free changes just about everything about your life, estate planning, your financial planning, insurance, everything. So it's a specific need, but also it's underserved. Right now, as far as I know, I'm the only firm that exists that's serving it. And bonus of that is you get press opportunities. I did the book, and same day, Market Watch called it best new idea in retirement, and Wall Street Journal ran a full article on it. When you're getting full page coverage from those type of places, it definitely makes your business grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to highlight this idea of choosing a niche. And it may be mundane and like, oh, I've heard it from a gazillion people, so I know I need to do it. But folks, we have that even here on our podcast. We have an episode that I released really early on. It's episode 29, and we're up in like the 300-400s now. Why choosing a niche will skyrocket your firm, episode 29. You could find it at profitwithlaw.com/029. Even in the legal industry, it's absolutely critical if you want to grow your business with any sort of accelerated timeline to focus on a very specific niche, because it does things like this. It allows you to write a book about it. It allows you to get on the a full page write up in various well-known publications because nobody else is talking about it, or because very few people are talking about it. It also allows you to be very specific in the way you market and the relationships you create. Even for me in the law firm industry, it's very easy for me to take what I do and do it for the accounting industry, and do it for doctors, and do it for podiatrists and chiropractors, any service-based business, really. But by focusing specifically on lawyers, if I had a podcast called Profit with Business, it'd be a lot harder to get you to listen to it. But because it's Profit with Law and you're a lawyer owning a law firm, you're tuning into my show. So it's just really good business planning if you can find a niche, choose it early on, to really help you hone in on everything that you're doing. But specifically about child free and the nuances of how does planning become different from regular people to people who are child free. I have a feeling that we kind of need to take a step back and look at, why is somebody doing financial planning in the first place, right? Like what is the objective of your planning? So Jay, can we start there and talk about how regular folk might look at it and how child free people might look at it?
Yeah, and the way I look at it from a financial planning standpoint, if you are a parent, there's a standard financial plan. And realistically, it just changes based on the number of kids. I think you said you have six coming on seven. So your college funding is going to be, a bigger number. It just changes over time. We just adjust the numbers. For child-free folks, there's so much flexibility. The way we say it is, living a life of child-free wealth means you have time, money, and freedom. Doesn't automatically make you rich. There's no like money drops from the sky, but you have a lot more flexibility, so that we actually, our process, we start with what your life is first, then your finances, then your taxes, where the standard plan starts with finances. And I'll give you an example of this. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, when can I retire? My question is, well, do you want to retire? And it turns out child-free folks don't. They're embracing something we call financial independence, live early, where they're taking the dimmer switch for work. They're investing in themselves. They're running a small business, they work for a nonprofit, or who knows, whatever, where they're not going to retire, which is completely different financial plan from people who are going to retire. Another great example, this is the end of the plan. I'm sure you have a plan to pass on money to your kids, or at least hope so. Child-free folks don't have a next of kin to pass it on, so they're embracing more like a die with zero approach and trying to give and live and use the money throughout their life.
It's very interesting because actually my entire business is revolving around this idea of helping people create generational wealth so that this and future generations can lead a better life. And child-free people may not resonate with that because they don't care about the future generations. But that's really a question. I don't want to assume that. Is it that they don't care about future generations? Like, are they not, are they not caring about climate change and things like that, where they're like, oh, how's the world going to carry on? Or are they just using their money philanthropically in different ways to further the same agenda? In other words, when I have money left, my legacy to the world is going to be to, leave it to this charity or invest or become an activist in this area. What are you seeing in that community? Is it just I want to die with zero, or is there another level of philanthropy interest that perhaps people with children don't have the freedom to do because they feel more obligated in providing for their kids?
Well, and I think it's just a different way of looking at it. For example, child-free folks, I did a question in a survey I did ask them why they chose to be child-free, and somewhere around 18% said because of the environment. Because if you actually want to if you want to lower carbon footprint, one less life is a whole lot less carbon footprint. It's not saying it's better or worse, it's just different. A lot of the child-free folks will go down the path of saying constant growth is not good for the environment, good for everything else. So it's not saying they don't care. Elon Musk recently said childless folks don't have a stake in the future, so they shouldn't be able to vote. And I'm like, dude, really? That's just not right. And what it is we just have a different perspective on the world.
Well, Elon Musk has a different perspective on pretty much everything.
I'm with you, but I just had to call it out. And, so my wife and I, our story, she had a 50-50 chance of dying if she got pregnant. Made our choice pretty simple for us. That doesn't mean we don't, worry about the environment or people say, what's your legacy? Well, my legacy is not going to be a genetic legacy, but it's still going to be a legacy. And it's interesting. The philanthropic folks, they know how to get money. Let's just be real. I mean, that's their job is to find it. And they target the child-free population because a higher percentage of them give in higher amounts because they have it to give. So die with zero doesn't mean, hey, I'm just going to, spend it all on me. It means the goal is not to pass on generational wealth. So maybe we should do different things with our money throughout our life to improve the lives of those around us and ourselves. And I think it's just a different way of thinking. Look at it this way. Your kids could use your money more now than when you die. Well, if you're just trying to save for the next generation, there might be better opportunities to help them earlier in their life. There's a book, Die with Zero, and the author dives into this, and he has kids. And his argument is, hey, your kids don't need the money when you're 80 and die, which he's right.
This is true. And, I do think it's a little silly to create just this massive amount of money that you're just going to give away on the day of your death. From a financial planning standpoint, that might make a lot of sense, if depending on how you have it invested and where you have it placed. But from a usability and enjoyment perspective, I'd much rather see my children and grandchildren using the money that I amassed for them than them use it after I'm gone, and not get to enjoy the fruits of my labor in that way. But at the same time, I'm curious if the child-free population feels like things are rigged against them or unfair. For example, in the tax system, there's a child tax credit. If you have a child, you get the tax credit, but if you don't get the tax credit. It's almost like the government is incentivizing you to have kids and penalizing you if you don't. There's even marriage versus not being married, right? If you're not having children, maybe you don't get married either. Maybe you have a life partner, but you don't get to be married filing jointly. You're married. You're filing a single return, and your tax brackets are higher because of that. So what's the general temperature there in the child-free population, and what do you as a wealth planner, are you doing any sort of advising on tax strategy because of these?
Yeah, so we call it a pronatalist bias. So if you really look at it, the system is set up for constant growth. Let's just go with a simple one. Social Security, if there's not constant growth, that system falls apart. Now, I think Social Security has some other issues besides the constant growth problem.
Oh, yeah.
But, way beyond our discussion today. But all these systems are based on it. You talk about the child tax credit. I always joke with my child-free folks. The average right now number is about $18,000 a year to have a child. So you get $3,600 back for a tax credit. That's not a good financial decision. We're not doing it for that. But child-free folks are expected to handle things differently. The tax is different. You're right. 32.1% of childless folks will never marry versus 2.5% of parents. But it's what's even more interesting is in the workplace, they're actually expected to do more hours of work. The Society for Human Resource Management did a study on this and looked at it and said, oh, childless folks, well, hey, you can't take the holidays off because so and so has kids, so they get it first, or whatever else it is. And there's all these biases built into the system. There's actually a group called the New Legacy Institute, which is working on how do we make sure that child-free folks have equal benefits as everybody else. By the way, that's a hard road. I mean, and in this current political world, there's a lot of pushback. I mean, I live in Mississippi, and reproductive rights are a hot topic right now down here, and to the point where I have to watch out for my client's privacy and a few other things. But what's happening is you see this bias over and over and over, and it's in our culture, it's in our religion, it's in our families, it's in our where child-free folks, if you ask them what's the worst thing about being child-free, it's judgment by other people.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm not recruiting people to be child-free. Like, you want to have kids or not, that's your choice. But I'll give you an example. So my wife and I went to get married, and she was raised in the Catholic Church. And we go to talk to the priest for the wedding and all, working through it. And he says, okay, you have to agree to raise your kids Catholic. We said, fine, we'll agree because we're not having kids. He goes, oh, no, no, no. You have to agree to have kids and raise them Catholic. We couldn't get married in the Catholic Church. 3 priests later, wasn't a choice. It's things you wouldn't even think about, but the bias is strong.
Wow. Yeah. It's all this stuff is, I mean, it's eye opening because you never think about it. But, I look at the workplace and you're right. Like we would like automatically assume that somebody who doesn't have kids is more flexible with when they work and how long they work. And that could be really unfair to them when they should have just as much an opportunity to be off or to not work as hard as people who have other obligations, or people who have families, like they're taking days off because their kid is sick, and employers are okay and looking the other way. We're fine with it. We support you, support your choices. What if a child-free person wants a day off just because, do they need to make up a fictitious kid being sick, or they, or do they get the same leeway? I think that with benefits, the biggest thing is health insurance. This is a big pet peeve of mine anyway. I feel like the whole system is rigged, against people who don't have everything, because an employer might make you contribute more to a family policy versus a couple policy versus a single policy. But they're not going to make you contribute the whole difference. So you have somebody who's got kids and you're putting in $15,000 or $20,000 towards their health insurance, and you have somebody who's single and you're only contributing $6,000 to their health insurance. How is it fair that you have another employee who's making $15,000 more than them just because they have kids? There should be a system where you either are contributing a set amount per employee using a cafe system, or you equalize it with with how much you contribute, or you give more. So I'm actually a paramedic also, besides for everything I do here. I talk about it every once in a while on the podcast. The company I work for, Rockland Paramedic Services, what they do is if somebody opts not to take health insurance, they give them a financial stipend. In other words, they give them money for not taking the insurance. Even there, it's not fair because they're not giving you the full amount that they're giving the people who have policies. But at least you're getting something for not taking it. I think that people who are single should get the financial benefit of not taking the family policy. If you're offering it, they should be paid that out as additional pay. So I completely see where you're coming from. It's totally unfair in a lot of situations, and I can see how that affects that population.
So let me go a little further on this. By the way, I served as a paramedic for years too, and I got out of it because after your back breaks too many times, and I'm sure you feel that one. But I think with benefits, I don't want to take anything away from parents. Parental leave, all that should be there. But for my wife and I, we get nothing. So a great example is my wife's a professor. kids go to college for free. Well, can I, as her spouse, go to college for free? No. Well, wait, how does that work? And you're talking about health benefits. I had somebody, I actually looked at their plan, and the um, the first thing is you have to be married, which is a separate bias. It should just be partner or whatever it is. But for the employee plus one price, it was an extra $100 to cover plus your kids, all kids, like however many you got. You could have your
Mhm.
6 kids for an extra $100 pay period. And I'm like, wait a minute, that math doesn't work. Like that's just it's not there. And as you start diving into this, you start seeing these inequalities over and over and over. And I don't think there's a way to fix it. And give you a legal fund of this one. Something like I forget the exact. I think it's 27 states have a law against discriminating against family status, but that law specifically protects people who have kids. It does not protect people who don't have kids. And it's like, wait a minute. If we're saying it's illegal to discriminate, it should be illegal to discriminate either
Either
way.
way. Yep.
Like, and nope, it's illegal to discriminate against somebody who has kids, but you can just, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is wrong. And that's the problem, is all these systematic biases are built in here. And you don't even think about them, but once you see them, like they're everywhere.
Right. So where do you come in for your clients? Are they just beginning their wealth creation process? Have they been, I presume, and again, here's a bias, right? But I presume that they've done a better job than people with kids as far as setting themselves up with savings and retirement funds, because they presumably had more what's the word I'm looking for? Dispensable cash as they earned it.
Yeah, and that assumption is going to be wrong for a couple of things. First thing is income disparities are still there.
Mm-hmm.
I got child for people who, somebody in my book was very excited. She moved from being on an air mattress to being on a regular bed. Like that was her succeed. And, the way I look at it is there are child for people that are barely keeping their head above water. The difference is if they had a kid, they'd be drowning, so that, it's not like they'd be doing much better either way. The other part of it is, remember that for child-free folks, the goal is not to run up the net worth scoreboard. So if you actually look at the numbers, the U.S. Census looked at adults over 55 and who has the highest net worth, and it is single childless women, but not by a statistically significant amount, a couple $1,000 over fathers. So it really actually, the math of saying, hey, child-free folks are richer, it doesn't work. Now, there are different expenses, different structures, So remember, if you got 32.1% are single, Fidelity did a study on this and found that it costs somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million extra across your life to be single, because you can't like split a house, you can't
Right.
there's
You
all
don't
these things
have
that,
you don't have the dual income possibility that two parents or two individuals getting together living under the same roof have.
yep. And if you are a dual income couple, yeah, you have some more flexibility, but your goal is not the highest net worth. And I have people come to me, they're doing very well and they've got good net worth. And then I go, okay, cool. What do you want to do with that money? And they hit what we call the child-free midlife crisis. You hit your personal, professional, and financial goals, and then what? And what usually happens with that is parents, when they hit that point, will then put their goals onto their kids. Well, when you're child-free, it's like, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? And we have these discussions all the time. Like, what do you want to do with your life? And it's so much deeper than, what your finances or what your money. And what ends up happening is you end up having these, I call it life and financial planning discussions together, trying to figure out like, what's the meaning in life? What's the impact you want to make? What's the legacy you want to make? What do you want to do with your life when you're not following the standard life script? The standard life script is you go to school, you get married, you have kids, buy a house, you retire, you do all this. That's not the script we're following. So when clients reach out to me, they'll first start off, we'll do housekeeping stuff, clean up their accounts, fix all that for them. But then it's, all right, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And that's not an easy discussion.
Yeah. So I actually have a business couple that I'm friends with, and they're child free, and they just went through that midlife crisis. up, sold their house, sold their belongings, and they decided that they want to be digital nomads or whatever. They want to just start traveling and live that lifestyle for now. Able to pick up and do that a lot harder when you have kids. But I mean, they're pretty well to do. I have no idea what their net worth is. But I can totally see where enjoying life and spending it is definitely the goal. But I don't know that that's not the goal with some people with children also. When I met my wife, she really opened my eyes to, like, I was a big, like, oh, save for the future, save for the future. And she's like, well, why are you not enjoying now? And let's live in the moment. And then we can also worry about saving for the future. So she kind of brought me a little bit more towards that reality as well. Um, Trying to figure out for our listeners, like, what would be the most value that we could provide. I mean, let's just go on a tangent here real quick on those that are estate planning attorneys. What do your clients need to think about differently than people with children when it comes to estate planning?
Yeah, we get the question. It happens so often. We call it one of our child free bingo. We actually have a bingo card of all the questions we collect. And the question is, who's going to take care of you when you're old? And here's the thing to think about: the entire government, hospital, healthcare, legal systems all assume next of kin. And if you don't have a next of kin, the states have some structure to help you, but let's be real, the states are not that helpful. And by
Right.
the way, when it comes to estate planning, the states are more than happy to take your money too. I mean, that's like,
Right.
they're not searching too hard for next of kin. So
Right.
when I talk
And
to my client,
who really wants the state making decisions for them?
nobody. So when I talk to my clients in their 30s, I'm saying, okay, cool. Do you have your will, your power of attorney, your medical power of attorney, your financial power of attorney in place? And they go, what's all that? And I'm like, listen, you don't have a next of kin. You go to the hospital, you've been with this partner for a decade. They're going, that's a nice person. Like, that's nobody. And I think that's one of those kind of culture shocks. I think the other part of it is, we know we have to have a plan for long-term care, whether it's, our goal is by the time we hit 45 to have a plan, whether it's either setting aside money or a long-term care insurance policy. But then there's a question is, like, who's going to, like, make the decision? Who's going to pull the plug? And it's one of those that I've been working on for years to work through some of the solutions on this, because depending on the state, so, like, for example, I'm working with clients in Texas. In Texas, none of the lawyers will touch the medical side. They're like, yeah, I'm not touching that. They might act as somebody's executor, or they might act as somebody's financial power of attorney. Trust companies might do some of it. But what will happen is, I have yet to find a solution, and I'm working on developing one for somebody to be executor, financial power of attorney, and medical power of attorney for these folks that need it. And we're not talking a small number. We're talking 20% of the US. And if we get to the single folks, so we're talking 32% of that, we're still talking millions of people that don't have a spouse, don't have a next of kin. And they're going, what do we do next? There's one attorney out in Georgia. Yeah, he's in Georgia. He offers a project called Aging Ally that helps with some of that. But it's realizing it's a different approach. We're not worried about, oh, let me set up a trust so that my money goes through generations and blah, blah, blah. No. That's not important for the child-free folks. It's simply, who's going to pull the plug on me? Like, who's going to manage myself? Who's going to put me in the home? Who's going to make sure I got good care? And that's where estate planning attorneys can really come in.
Yeah. Do you find that they need to put, I mean, I guess with the idea of having them spend everything down before they die, there's no need for them to create a trust or a revocable trust and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, there's very little need. I think where the need comes in is if somebody's going to manage your money for you when you're disabled. So something like a springable situation. But a lot of the trust stuff, the classic, hey, I want to pass down for generations. No, because they'll give it during their time. The way I say it is, my nephews get what's left over. They get 10 grand, 100 grand, that's fine. If they get $1 million, I made a mistake because I should have given that to them when they needed it, or done something with it myself.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because how do you know when your family members need it, right? Like I mean, some people have no problem coming and asking for a handout, but most of them are not going to say, "Hey, I'm in trouble," or, I could really use some help. What do you do? You mentioned your nephews. What do you do to try to pay attention and notice when there's an opportunity?
So my wife and I, we're both academics by nature. So we have 529s for each of our nephews. And, it comes with rules and how they have to spend it and all that. But that's intentionally set up because they're going to need it at that time. The other part of it is when it comes to giving and supporting family, we actually have a process we call the 8 no baby steps that we walk through for child free folks. And step 7 is what's your plan for mom and dad? How are you caring for them? How are you providing support? What's kind of interesting is child free folks get the, well, you don't have kids so you can take care of mom. It's like this like reaction thing. And I've been caring for my mother, disabled most of my life, but it's more of how do we build a support team around them? How do we provide aging care managers or financial planners or estate plan, all of that to our parents? I don't take parents as clients except for the parents of my child free folks, because there's so many elderly folks that need this. And it becomes a partnership saying, hey, mom, what do you need? Where can I help? And I personally, I'm not giving money directly to family members, but there's other ways you can provide support and be included in to do that within reason. Because the other part of it is we get child free folks get the, well, you've got all this money, you should just give it to, and I'm like, no. Like, you don't get a vote in how I spend my money.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing is like people, they try to like figure out like do you have money? And I'm going to tell you what you should be doing with your money. And nobody wants to be told what to do with their money. Nobody wants to be told what to do, period. So, all right. So if we have child-free people in our listener base listening to this episode, what is something that we haven't discussed that they need to hear when it comes to their financial life?
So my advice to child-free folks, whenever you talk to financial planners, lawyers, whoever you're talking to, is to ask, how is your plan different because you're child-free? If they say, well, it's no different, you need to just walk out of the room. Or if they say, oh, you'll change your mind, just walk out of the room. I think the hard part is having that discussion and saying, how am I different? And if they go, well, let me look at that, let me figure it out. That's okay. Like, I'm okay if they don't know the answer, but being able to get specific advice. Like, great example of this, life insurance. General rules 10 to 12 times your income. Well, for child-free folks, I don't need life insurance.
Correct.
Like, but I need disability insurance because there's nobody, so it changes everything about it. It's all these little nuances that you need to make sure the people you're working with know you in your life.
Yeah, and the problem is that people with kids also need disability insurance, but it kind of takes a back seat because life insurance is more affordable, at least term insurance, and disability insurance is much more expensive. And when you start making decisions, you're like, oh, I'm going to take what I can afford, but your chances of getting disabled are much higher than your chances of dying. So it's an interesting dynamic. I'm guessing that your child-free people are more prepared for that kind of situation than people with kids.
I get them there, but here's the other part you're missing. The insurance agents make a lot more selling life insurance than they do selling disability. So I had a client went in to get a disability quote from insurance agent that they had worked with forever and walked out with 6 different life insurance quotes. And I'm like, what happened here? And what had happened was that agent makes money selling life insurance. They don't make money selling disability insurance.
Right.
It's that commission structure. And, I'm like, all right, we got to go figure this out. We got to go figure out a structure. And you're right. Disability insurance is not cheap, but if you're disabled and go on social security disability, you're getting paid like nothing. I mean, like nothing. And you're going to be doing that for the rest of your life. And especially if you're single, you're screwed. Like, I don't mean to be rude about it, but that's the bottom line. You got to have disability insurance. You go, well, I'm fine. No, anyone can fall or have a stroke or have a heart attack or something. And next thing you know, they're disabled.
Yeah. Get hit by an uninsured motorist.
Yep.
I mean, everyone thinks, oh, if I get into an accident, wherever that is, they're going to have a policy. It's going to set me up for life. But how many times you get hit by somebody who's a drunk driver, their license was revoked, three drunk driving violations ago, and they can't have a car registered or insured because then the government will know about it. So here they are tooling around the streets driving drunk, and you're their next victim. um very interesting stuff. I want to just shine the light real quick on our listeners. There's definitely listeners that have kids. There's definitely listeners who are not estate planning attorneys. So for any attorney in any practice area, how can they be more in tune to their clients' needs when presented with somebody who's child free versus the typical familial client?
Yep. And first thing is don't use that family term like that because child free folks have a family. It's just different. I think the hard part for any attorney or any professional deal with child free folks is, let's just start with watching your language, and the judgments come with it. You don't need to ask somebody, why are you not having kids? It's just like that's prying into their stuff. You just have to accept them for who they are. And you have to realize they're there. So, interestingly enough, so the people that are listening to this, if you got employees, you have 4 or 5 employees, chance statistically, one of those is child free. And I'll bet you they're not loud about it because it's almost like a coming out of time for people to say they're child free. You've got to create an environment where it's okay to be who you are. And I will tell you, different areas of the U.S., big difference, but I think it's being accepting of the person as who they are and then going, let's look at what's different. And I think the hard part is if you try to fit things that would have fit otherwise, they're just not going to fit. So it's a great time to customize your programs, customize your structures. But the other part is look at your systems and see if there's systematic bias. Great example of this. A lot of the software all assumes you have kids, and any tax planning software, if you have 2 people together, automatically assumes they're married. Well, these are all assumptions that are biases that become issues. So you need to look at your systems, your structures, and see, hey, what are we doing through a different lens?
Right. And the worst is when you don't allow them to advance to the next screen because they didn't choose a viable option, but you don't have a viable option that fits them.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Very interesting stuff and really enlightening for me. First of all, I used the word family before. I think I said typical familial situation. So I don't think I was that bad, but I certainly, you called it out. And I was, thinking that you have your family structure and then you have your people who are childless, and you're absolutely right. They're a family too. It just looks different. So even me and my own vernacular here, having a conversation with you about this, snuck that bias in. So appreciate you calling me out on it, and pointing it out to us, to our listeners. Very, very interesting to learn about this segment of the population and the things that they need to think about and the things that make them tick. For me as a business coach, perhaps they're not my target market because I talk so much about wealth generation for future generations. But I'm not trying to exclude them. So certainly welcome to be in my world. And if you're one of those listening to this podcast, I'm happy to have you here and I appreciate you. But I can even see in my own business, there's a lot that we can do to get back to the basics, to to look at where do we have systems and processes and things that are specifically geared towards. Even in our coaching, we do a whole financial planning session for the business, and it's all based off of your financial need for your own personal life. And a lot of that is geared around stuff that you would need when you have kids and things like that. So I need to go back and look at that and make sure that it's geared well for people who don't have kids. So this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you bringing it to us. And folks, if you want to learn more about it, I definitely encourage you to get the book. What is it? Portraits of Child-Free Wealth.
Yep. And you can actually download a free ebook version at childfreewealth.com/book.
Okay, perfect. So we'll link that up in the show notes for you. So you don't have to remember that link while you're in the shower, on a run, whatever you're doing while you're driving in traffic, while listening to this episode. Our show notes, you can read them right there below the podcast episode. Depending on your podcast player, should be the resources section right beneath it. But you can always go to profitwithlaw.com where we have the show notes of every single episode that we've released there. Newest ones will be on top. There's a resources section in every single one that has all the links that we discuss. So definitely go there and check that out. As we wrap it up here, Jay, if you can do two things for me. Number one parting piece of wisdom advice for our listeners. Number two, how do they take the next step in getting to know you, getting in touch with you if they want to learn more about this topic or collaborate with you? They're an estate planning attorney. They want to focus on the child-free arena, anything like that.
So one last one, just fun one for the lawyers. I had somebody in a session say to me, "Well, if you're child free and you get divorced, it's not as bad." Oh, there's a lot of judgment that comes in there. It's different. It's not good, bad, or ugly. And I think that's the point with the child free folks. You can specialize on serving parents, you can specialize on serving intergenerational wealth. That's fine. Just be aware of the people that are out there. If you want to reach out to me, childforwealth.com, Child for Wealth Podcast, Child for Wealth on all the socials except for Twitter, because I already told you the Elon Musk story. But always happy to talk about how being child free impacts your life, finances, and everything else.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay, for being with us today. This is a great conversation. And folks, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we're here every single Thursday. Make sure you subscribe to the show. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, we thrive on ratings and reviews, just like your law firm needs ratings and reviews on Google and Yelp and all the other places where people might be searching for you. When somebody comes into the podcast arena and they do a search for lawyer podcast for law firm ownership, all that stuff, and our podcast is one of the things showing up in the search results, they're going to be taking a look at those ratings and reviews to decide whether this is worth a listen. So I would appreciate it if you're enjoying this show that you take a moment of your time to give us a rating and review. Really helps us and moves the needle in the right direction for us to continue to grow our subscriber base and people who are listening and tuning in every single week. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here, and we will catch you next Thursday. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.